They stopped him before he could even step onto the plane. The ticket was checked, questions were asked, and all the while, they completely overlooked the fact that he held the keys to a $48 million deal with their airline. That morning, Dorian Brandt looked every bit the professional. His suit was impeccable, crisp, and sharp. The collar of his shirt sat just right, framing his face perfectly. He moved through JFK's Terminal 4 with the kind of confidence that comes from years of early flights and late meetings. In his left hand, a black leather briefcase, well worn but stylish. In his right, a first-class ticket to San Francisco. He was headed to a major farming conference where he would be the keynote speaker. At 58, Dorian was no stranger to these high-stakes events. He wasn't the type to crave the spotlight, preferring instead the calm of efficiency. But something felt different that morning the moment he approached Gate 17. The boarding line hadn't even started, just a few people milling about with coffee in hand, casually checking their phones. Dorian stepped up to the counter and gave the young woman behind it a polite nod. He handed her his ticket. She didn't scan it right away. Instead, she studied him. A double take, the kind of look someone gives when they're unsure. Dorian remained calm, his patience steady. "This line is for premium passengers only," she said, her voice sharp. "I know," Dorian replied, his tone calm and even. She blinked, then scanned the ticket, but paused before continuing. Instead of letting him through, she turned to a co-worker and whispered something. The other woman glanced over at Dorian, but he gave no reaction. "I need to see your ID," the first woman said. Dorian raised an eyebrow slightly. "You don't usually ask for ID when scanning a ticket. Is there a problem?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering. "It's just a security check." But there was no policy requiring ID at the gate. Dorian knew it. She knew it. Still, he reached into his wallet and handed her his driver's license. She took it, holding it awkwardly, then placed it back on the counter without even scanning it. "Wait here," she instructed. Dorian glanced at his ticket. His name was printed clearly. Dorian Brandt. He didn't say a word. The woman walked away, her footsteps quiet as she whispered something to a man in a dark uniform. Moments later, a security officer appeared beside Dorian, standing close and eyeing him like he was a potential threat. Dorian had been through this before. Rarely, but enough to recognize the drill. That shift, from quiet respect to quiet suspicion, came fast. Not because of anything Dorian had done, but because some people couldn't picture someone like him in first class. Still, he stayed calm. He stepped away from the gate, out of the line. No arguing. No raised voice. He wasn't going to give them the scene they seemed to be waiting for. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Maggie, it's me. Pull up the catering contract we finalized with Horizon Air. Western flights, signed 2 weeks ago. Yes, I'm at JFK, Gate 17. I'll wait." He stood there, his expression unreadable, his posture easy, like a man waiting for an elevator, not a confrontation. The woman behind the gate glanced nervously in his direction, then leaned into the microphone. "We're just resolving a minor issue. Thanks for your patience." A man in a gray sweater leaned toward her and whispered, "Is he causing trouble or something?" Dorian heard it. He didn't turn around. On the phone, Maggie's voice came back. "Got it. Want me to call corporate?" "Just flag it," Dorian said quietly. "I think they're about to realize their mistake." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. His ticket was still in his hand. And he waited. That call wasn't a complaint. It was a warning. A quiet reminder of who Dorian Brandt was. He hadn't always worn tailored suits or flown first class. He was born and raised in Mansfield, Ohio, in a small house with creaky floors and thin walls. His mother, Eunice, worked in the produce section of the local grocery store. His father, Leonard, worked overnight shifts at the factory and fixed cars on weekends. They didn't have much, but there was always food on the table and pride in their work. Dorian learned early that how you carry yourself matters. At 15, he was up every Saturday at 5 a.m., helping his mother sort fruits and vegetables before the store opened. That's where he learned to spot a ripe melon by feel, and how to speak to people, not at them. It's a small difference, but it changes everything. By 23, Dorian had a degree in agricultural business and $330,000 saved from side jobs and smart investing. His first business? A humble produce stand just outside Columbus. No staff, just a borrowed pickup truck, a tent, and crates of sweet corn he sold like it was rare treasure. The real turning point came in his 30s. He saw what others missed. Big grocery chains needed fresh, local produce, but they also needed it to be sustainable. Clean. Responsible. That was the future, and Dorian moved fast to build it. It wasn't about fancy farmers' market trends, just real food, grown right and delivered fast. Dorian started Brandt Global Foods in a rented garage with one delivery truck and a laptop that crashed more than it worked. He made deals farm by farm, building a network from the ground up. 15 years later, Brandt Global supplied over 30 premium grocery chains, 5 major universities, and, most recently, Horizon Air. The airline had come to him. After a wave of bad press about their in-flight meals, they wanted better. Dorian listened carefully, then offered a solution. Fresh, seasonal food sourced directly from farms, with less waste and higher quality. They signed a $48 million contract. But despite the success, Dorian never forgot his roots. His office wasn't lined with awards or glass trophies. Instead, the walls held photos of his first produce stand and handwritten thank you notes from farmers he'd helped over the years. He didn't chase drama. He avoided the spotlight. And he never flaunted power. He used it quietly, only when necessary. So when the woman at the gate looked at him like he didn't belong, it wasn't just frustrating. It was a sharp reminder. No matter how far you come, some people only see what they expect to see. But Dorian Brandt didn't need to raise his voice to prove anything. He never had. Dorian had always let his actions speak louder than his words. That call at Gate 17 wasn't about starting trouble. It was about giving the airline a quiet chance to correct a mistake. Because while Dorian believed in staying calm and kind, he believed just as strongly in fairness. What happened next wasn't dramatic. Not yet. The woman at the gate, Haley, didn't know who Dorian Brandt was. To her, he was just another name on a ticket, one she decided didn't look like he belonged in first class. Haley was in her early 30s, new to the job, still learning to balance rules with instinct. She was eager to do things by the book, but she hadn't yet learned how to read people beyond what they wore or how they moved. By now, the boarding line had started forming. A man in a navy blazer paced near the front. A woman with a floral carry-on glanced up, clearly irritated by the delay. Haley adjusted her mic and muttered, "I need backup." She glanced sideways at Dorian, who remained still, calm, watching without watching. Her co-worker Mia leaned over and whispered, "What's going on? Is there actually a problem?" Haley hesitated. "He says he's first class." Mia glanced at the screen. "His ticket says he is, so what's the issue?" Haley frowned, uneasy. "I don't know. It just doesn't feel right." Mia's posture shifted, subtle but sharp. A silent warning, one Haley didn't pick up on. But Haley wasn't listening. She stared at her screen, pretending to look for a note that wasn't there. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard like she might find justification if she just kept typing. The security guard stood a few feet away, arms crossed, still watching Dorian, but silent, unsure of what he was even looking for. Passengers continued boarding. The first-class line was thinning. Time was moving, and Haley felt it slipping. She glanced at the gate. Her nervousness showed in the way she shifted from foot to foot, biting her lip. But pride, fear of being wrong, kept her rooted. Then Dorian's phone rang. He stepped aside and answered quietly. Maggie's voice came through, calm and precise. "I've already alerted their regional VP. I also reached out to Jack Renaud. He's head of food services on their end." "Thanks," Dorian replied. "Keep me posted." He ended the call. His expression hadn't changed. Calm. Still. Professional. Back at the desk, Mia's discomfort grew. She leaned in close and pulled Haley aside. "Do you know who that is?" she whispered. Haley blinked. "Number just some guy who—" Mia cut her off. "That's Dorian Brandt. His company was just added to our vendor list. You remember the new produce deal with Horizon? That's him." Haley froze. "Wait. What?" "Brandt Global Foods. He owns it. We're working with them now." Haley's stomach dropped. Her mouth went dry. She turned slowly, eyes landing on Dorian, still standing quietly, ticket in hand. No yelling, no accusations, just patience. "Maybe we should just let him board now," Mia said gently. But Haley panicked. "If we let him board now, it'll look like we—" Haley didn't finish her sentence. Her earpiece crackled. "Haley, what's the delay at gate 17? It was her supervisor. "We're seeing a hold flag." Haley stiffened. "Just handling a passenger issue. It's under control." The supervisor didn't buy it. "Fix it. Corporate execs are flying in today. No mistakes." Haley's hand trembled as she adjusted her mic. She looked back at Dorian, still standing silently, a picture of composed authority. That calm unnerved her more than if he had yelled. She wasn't managing a situation anymore. She was the situation. Mia turned to speak, maybe to apologize, but the boarding door beeped. Another passenger, a man in khakis, glanced over his shoulder. "What's the holdup?" he muttered. Haley didn't answer. Her throat felt tight. Words stuck behind it. Dorian stepped a few feet toward the window, hands in his pockets, watching the luggage carts roll by. There was no urgency in him. He didn't need to rush. Time was working for him. Haley, on the other hand, was running out of it. 10 floors above the terminal, Cynthia Reyes sat in a glass-walled office overlooking the runways. She was halfway through a croissant, skimming a vendor report, when her personal phone rang. She rarely answered unknown numbers, but her assistant had flagged this one urgent. She swiped to answer. "Cynthia Reyes speaking." A calm voice responded, "Hi, Cynthia." "Maggie Geller calling on behalf of Dorian Brandt, CEO of Brandt Global Foods. There's a situation at Gate 17. Your staff is denying him boarding despite a confirmed first-class ticket. We're concerned this may escalate." Cynthia Reyes sat up straighter. She knew the name Dorian Brandt well. Horizon Air had just signed a multi-million-dollar partnership with his company to overhaul their in-flight catering, part of a broader effort to recover from recent PR fallout. This wasn't just a customer service issue. It was a crisis in the making. "Is he still at the gate?" Cynthia asked, already grabbing her tablet. "Yes, he's calm, professional, but your team is not handling this appropriately." "I'll take care of it," Cynthia said, already on her feet. She stepped into the hallway, phone still to her ear. "Tell him I'm on my way." She ended the call and flagged down her assistant. "Get Sean and Elise from PR." Now. Meanwhile, in Horizon's Minneapolis headquarters, Jack Renaud was halfway through his lunch when his phone lit up. "Maggie here," the voice said quickly. "Dorian's being delayed at JFK. Horizon staff flagged him. For nothing." Jack froze mid-bite. "You're kidding." "Nope. He called me directly. He's not angry, but he's watching everything." Jack was already pushing his chair back. "All right, I'll loop in Cynthia. You might want to quietly flag legal, just in case." He hung up and started dialing. If this went public, weeks of repair work could unravel in hours. Press releases, ad campaigns, the entire Fresh Flights rebrand. All of it had featured Dorian Brandt, the face of sustainable airline food, and now that same face was being quietly held at a boarding gate by someone who had no idea who he was. At Gate 17, Haley was unraveling. The tension was no longer subtle. Mia's silence had turned icy, and passengers were audibly frustrated. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable," while another snapped a photo. The boarding screen still said, "On time," but no one was moving. Then, momentum. A man in a Navy suit with a Horizon Air badge strode toward the gate. Behind him, a woman in red heels followed, still speaking into her phone. She ended the call mid-sentence, slipped her phone into her coat. Cynthia Reyes. She didn't hesitate. Her eyes swept the gate area like a scan. Passengers. Staff. Dorian. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. He simply watched her. He knew who she was, and she clearly knew who he was, too. Cynthia approached with steady professionalism. "Mr. Brandt," she said, extending her hand. "Cynthia Reyes, Executive Director of Regional Operations." Her voice was calm, measured, but firm. "May I have a word with you? Privately." Dorian nodded once. His phone slid quietly into his pocket. "Of course," he said. They stepped aside. Behind them, Haley remained frozen, unsure whether to follow, apologize, or vanish into the carpet. Cynthia took a quiet breath, composed but alert. "Mr. Brandt," she began, "on behalf of Horizon Air, I sincerely apologize. I've already instructed our internal team to investigate. This should never have happened." She paused. "I'd also like to personally escort you on board." Dorian didn't nod, didn't thank her. Instead, he asked, "Do you know which seat I was assigned?" She glanced down at her tablet. "Seat 1A. Dorian gave the faintest smile. "First row. Interesting. I was told this line was for premium passengers only." Cynthia didn't flinch. "Again, I'm sorry." But Dorian leaned in slightly, voice quiet but precise. "The problem isn't the mistake, Ms. Reyes. It's the assumption behind it." That landed. Cynthia's throat tightened. She gave a small nod. "Understood." He held her gaze a beat longer, then looked past her toward the gate. Haley hadn't moved. She stood behind the desk, headset clipped to her collar, hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't speaking into the mic anymore, just watching. Watching a conversation she couldn't hear, but one that echoed louder than any gate announcement. The boarding had paused. The line was gone. Passengers lingered near the gate, murmuring, unsure whether to board, stay, or film. The monitors still showed the flight as on time. But nothing was moving. Because everyone was waiting. For someone to own what happened next. Mia avoided looking at Haley. She didn't need to. Everyone at the gate already knew. Something had gone wrong. Cynthia lifted a hand, signaling a tall, sandy-haired man approaching with a clipped stride and a black lanyard bouncing against his chest. Justin Cole, Horizon's legal liaison for East Coast operations, had been briefed in the elevator. He knew better than to offer excuses. He extended a hand. "Mr. Brandt, I'd like to personally apologize. I understand this experience has been— Dorian raised a hand, stopping him gently. I don't need an apology, Mr. Cole. I need an explanation. How does something like this happen after we sign a $48 million partnership? Justin paused. No playbook could save him here. Cynthia quickly stepped in. Mr. Brandt, we take this very seriously. We're reviewing our frontline protocols, staff conduct, and retraining procedures. But please understand, this incident doesn't reflect our values. Dorian's expression barely shifted, but his voice carried weight. Doesn't reflect the company's values, or doesn't reflect your employees' judgment. The question hung in the air like smoke. Cynthia hesitated. Dorian turned slightly, gesturing toward Haley, who now stood behind the desk as if gravity itself had thickened around her. Her headset drooped from her collar. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't move. He didn't need to say more, because the silence already had. Haley had seen a well-dressed man with a premium ticket and assumed he didn't belong. Not once, but repeatedly. She'd called security, escalated the situation when I simply asked a question. Dorian's gaze was unwavering as he addressed Cynthia. You don't need to explain what that's about. I've lived it. Justin cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the shift in power. We're prepared to issue a formal apology, privately or publicly. Dorian's expression didn't waver. You think I'm here for an apology? They hesitated. Without a word, Dorian pulled a thin folder from his bag. He slid it across the counter toward Cynthia. This is our contract. My company supplies fresh food for your Western and Midwest flights, including the premium lounges. So when I say the person being blocked at this gate is your brand, I mean that literally. He watched as she took the folder, her fingers tightening around it like a weight too heavy to hold. I don't want a tweet. I don't want a letter. I want better. Because the next person you treat like a security risk for doing nothing might not have a direct line to your VP nearby, passengers whispered. A woman in the business class line casually pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll, but obviously recording. Justin shifted uncomfortably. We'll review this immediately and implement the necessary changes. Dorian glanced at his watch, a silent signal that his patience had run out. You have my word. Good. Then we can all go about our day, he said, his tone cool and controlled. Before Cynthia could escort him onto the plane, Dorian paused and turned slightly. He looked at Haley, who stood frozen, her hands clutching her badge like a shield. His gaze was sharp, but it wasn't filled with anger. It was something far colder. Disappointment. He didn't say a word to her. There was no need. Cynthia signaled to the crew, and the gate reopened. Without another glance at Haley, Dorian walked toward the jet bridge, Justin trailing quietly behind him. Back at the gate, Mia stepped up beside Haley, her voice low. You don't get it, she said, eyes on Dorian's retreating figure. That man's company supplies half the food in first class. Haley didn't respond. She was numb, her mind spinning. On board, the atmosphere was different. The crew greeted Dorian not with the usual robotic smiles, but with quiet, respectful recognition. Jordan, a flight attendant, offered to take his bag. Another staff member brought him water without being asked. Mr. Brandt, if you need anything before takeoff, just say the word, Jordan said softly, his voice carrying a subtle respect. Dorian nodded, but his expression remained unchanged. He wasn't interested in gestures. Outside, something strange was happening. The pulse of the terminal slowed. The energy dampened, as if the weight of what had just transpired lingered in the air. 3 more Horizon flights were suddenly delayed. No explanations, just vague operational holds. In reality, Corporate had quietly ordered the pause. Cynthia was locked in a meeting room, calling in legal, HR, and crisis management. No one said it outright, but the flight wasn't leaving until they knew the full extent of the fallout. The flight eventually took off, but by then, Dorian was long past the incident. When he landed in San Francisco, he was one of the last passengers to deboard. Only then did he check his phone, scanning through a series of messages. Emails from Horizon, a text from his assistant, and a link to a small news blog that had picked up the story. Nothing that had gone viral, but just enough of a ripple to make its way into the right circles. At the conference, Dorian delivered his keynote with the same composed confidence he always had. He didn't address the airport incident directly, but his words carried weight. "Sometimes the problem isn't the system," he said, his voice steady. "It's the shortcuts we take in reading people. What we assume about others says more about us than it ever could about them." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Soft, but genuine. Afterward, a man from a distribution firm approached him. "That thing you said about shortcuts really hit me harder than I expected." Dorian offered a knowing smile, his eyes cool but appreciative. "That's where the rot starts, the shortcuts," Dorian reflected. Back in New York, Cynthia reviewed the internal report. The gate logs showed no legitimate threats, just an unjustified call to security. Haley's name didn't appear on the next day's schedule. Weeks passed. Horizon announced a new partnership with a civil rights advisory group. A few news outlets made the connection, but Dorian stayed silent. He returned to his work as usual. The incident didn't fade away because it went viral. It lingered because people remembered it. Gate agents began thinking twice before making assumptions. The story was whispered in break rooms. And somewhere in Ohio, Dorian's mother read the article with a quiet smile. "That's my son. Sometimes, the loudest message you can send is the one you don't speak at all." If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more meaningful tales.